One game I'm always being recommended is Darkwing Duck on the NES. Apparently it uses the same engine as Mega Man 5, so it plays a lot like a classic NES Mega Man game, so that would appeal to me. I wasn't a big fan of the show as a kid, but it wasn't because the show was bad or anything. I think there were just other things on to watch, so I just never really tuned into Darkwing Duck. Darkwing Duck came out in 1992 for the NES, which, as you may know, means it was a late life cycle game and the SNES was already out at the time. I had my SNES and was not really looking for new NES games, so I slept on it. It wasn't until I bought it in the last few months that I finally picked it up and gave it a try. Never tried it on emulation, never rented it, just a brand new experience for the NES, as made by Capcom in 2021. So what did I think? Well, the presentation is pretty awesome to start. The theme song is represented pretty well here. I did remember that from the cartoon. There are cutscenes throughout and a really cool intro movie. The graphics are pretty good, but they're definitely not as good as the Mega Man game that borrowed its engine from. A lot of backgrounds are kind of bland by comparison, and the enemy sprites are sometimes a mess. Like, look at this guy. It's kind of hard to tell what he was at first, but that may be just a result of basing sprite work off of art that wasn't created with video games in mind. Otherwise, it's still a good-looking NES game overall, just doesn't stand out as one of the best. The music, however, kicks a lot of ass. The themes are all upbeat and fun to listen to, just have that jazzy noir feel to each one. I really enjoyed the theme to Moriarty's level. I knew it wasn't the final level, but it sure sounded like it. Really good stuff here. After the intro, you're given the option to fly to any of these 3 starting levels. After that, there are another set of levels to take on before taking on the final level where the big bad Steelbeak resides. It's nice having some options, but that's nothing new to Disney Capcom games, as DuckTales had options to start, and Rescue Rangers had some player choice with routes on the overworld map. The gameplay feels pretty solid. You can tell it's a Capcom game as all the basics, walking, jumping, and shooting feel really good for the most part. DW also has the ability to duck and shoot, and if you hold the up button, he can shield himself with his cloak, which actually deflects projectiles shot straight at him. On the surface, Darkwing Duck checks all of the boxes for a great licensed Capcom game, but there were a few things regarding gameplay that really irked me. Enemies respawn pretty easily, so if you kill something and scroll off the screen to dodge an attack, for example, the enemy will be right back where you killed it. At least this helps with farming for health drops, which you'll need to do a lot in this game. DW only has 4 hit points, so you can't play this game like a Mega Man game, no matter how much the control feels like one. You'll expect to tank through damage like the Blue Bomber could and end up dead pretty quickly. This doesn't bug me much because it's my own fault that I tend to charge in, but sometimes you can really get caught up in respawning enemy damage loops or projectile fire, taking more than 1 or 2 points of damage without a real way to defend against it. The invincibility frames of DW after getting hit are pretty short, so be careful. Darkwing can have 3 shots on screen at a time, but at one point I was confused as to why I was having so much trouble shooting while jumping. I'd try to get some shots off to hurt an enemy heading my way only to get hammered, or I'd try to hit a fleeing boss and my gun wouldn't fire. At first I thought it was something wrong with my controller, but then I figured out that holding up on the D-pad makes Darkwing pull up his cloak as I mentioned earlier. But that also means he can't shoot while he's doing that. So when my fingers are hitting left or right while jumping, sometimes I guess my up button is triggering, meaning DW goes into the defense, where I'm trying to get him to shoot. It was annoying to have to try to remember not to hold the D-pad how I'm used to. Again, maybe my failing rather than the game's, but anyway. You can't shoot through walls, which seems really unfair because a lot of enemies can, and do, and you can't shoot them easily to defend yourself. DW being able to dash or slide to get away from enemies quickly would have been a nice addition. Ducking and blocking definitely can help, but it's just not the same. Darkwing does have access to a few extra weapon types to use, in the form of Thunder Gas, Heavy Gas, and Arrow Gas. These all take ammo to use, which drop fairly frequently from enemies, so unless you rely solely on these special weapons, you should always have enough ammo. If it sounds like I'm being too harsh on this game, I agree with you. For all its flaws, it does do a lot right. Again, the basic controls are very solid, and platforming isn't really a problem at all. Other than a few quibbles about hitboxes when jumping near spikes, which don't insta-kill you in this game, thankfully, I didn't really have a lot of problems getting around that weren't due to me being unfamiliar with the controls. I had a few problems with dropping from platforms and grabbing onto grappling holds here and there, but I feel like with more experience with this game, I would stop having issues like that. One thing Darkwing Duck does that Mega Man games don't do on the NES is adds an element of verticality. There are vertically scrolling parts in this game, and the mechanic that allows DW to grab onto platforms from below, as well as all of the grappling points where there are lanterns or hooks or whatever to grab onto, is really fun and adds a nice element to the platforming. Sometimes it's hard to avoid fire when you're hanging because you're vulnerable. You can't block or anything, but some quick firing or a timely jump can help you here. Another point I really like about this game are the boss fights. They all have their movement patterns, and figuring these out and exploiting them is a blast. I always like good pattern-based boss fights in retro games. With the exception of the final boss, they're all pretty simple to figure out, and they feel good when you trash the boss after a long and challenging level. The final boss really pissed me off at first though, because you have to avoid these fast-moving drones that shoot at you so you can try to jump onto the hooks and fire at him. But once I figured out that you need to kill the drones ASAP and then jump onto the top left hook, you can kind of just spam your gun and take everything out fairly easily. Darkwing Duck is a very good, albeit unpolished game, that I feel with some practice on my part, I could really grow to love it. As it stands though, it does just kind of piss me off. But I keep coming back to it now, so they definitely did something right. If you're a fan of Mega Man games or Capcom's other licensed Disney games, or really just a fan of retro games in general, I can safely recommend this one. I missed out on it for years, and it was nice jumping into a new experience. I grabbed this as a physical copy on my NES for quite a hefty sum, actually. But if you don't want to go that route, you can always get the Disney Afternoon Collection for like $20, not on sale for any of the major consoles and PC. So that's probably the route I'd go for this. Darkwing Duck's a good game. Definitely one of the better ones on the NES, and I definitely recommend it. But just remember that if you're a hardcore Mega Man fan like I am, it might piss you off a little bit. Otherwise, it's pretty good. Thanks for watching. Later.